Okay, in the previous video we talked about Lorenzo Charles, and we will now talk about the second of the six out of the six persons we want to talk about, and the second person is Jim Valvano. But just before we talk about him, I just wanted to give you an update on the fly that was annoying me in the previous video. Um, I'm glad to say it is dead. I was able to, by the grace of God, to kill it, and I know that has prophetic significance as well. One of my policies has always been that if a fly gets into a room I'm in, and if I have control over the room, that fly may check in, but it won't check out. I always shut all the doors and close all the windows, and I decree a death sentence on that little critter, and that's what happened with the fly. So the fly is dead. The Spanish fly is dead. Now let's proceed to talk about Jim Valvano. Jim Valvano was the head coach of NC State, the university where Lorenzo Charles played, where they won the national championship in 1983. And I did know about this. I do remember, even though the 90s were, for the most part, like a big blur to me, I do remember that Jim Valvano died very young, and he ended up dying from bone cancer. From what I learned on the internet, I did remember that he had died of some disease, of cancer, of some sort of cancer, but more specifically, he died of bone cancer, and he died at the age of 47, which is the same age of death of Lorenzo Charles. And I know that is not a coincidence. I mean, why 47? So that emphasizes the death of the manifestation of the river of God. And another interesting thing about Jim Valvano was that he was born in Corona, in Queens, New York. And Lorenzo Charles was born in New York as well. He was born in Brooklyn, and that has spiritual significance because, as we share on the website, Brooklyn is a figure of the manifestation of the river of God as well. I remember that it was one cold winter day. I'm not sure if we talk about this on the website, but it was a very sad day. I think it was December 2005 or January 2006. I think it was December 2005. I remember that Sunday, it was a cold winter morning, and I was living in the New York metropolitan area in New Jersey, and I asked the Lord that Sunday, or that, I think it was on the night before, I asked him, Lord, what do you want me to do tomorrow? And I remember that God said to me, Wall Street. You have to go to Wall Street. So I ended up going to Wall Street for whatever reason. So I went to New York, and I took the subway, and I went to Wall Street, and I started walking around the Wall Street area in Manhattan. And I just sensed this sadness as I was walking around this place, and I don't think I knew it. I'm pretty sure I didn't know it at the time, but I found out later on that I think it was the second great revival in America began in the Wall Street area, and it's very possible that I walked by the place where it all started. I think it was in the mid to late 19th century. There was this person who had this longing to see the manifestation of God in America, and he worked around the Wall Street area in New York at that time, and he decided to start an intercessory group. And I think he handed out flyers or something. He started telling people to gather at a certain place in the Wall Street area of Manhattan to pray. And I think the first time they came together was only like one or two people who came to the meeting, but slowly the meeting began to grow, and these people were just praying and praying and praying. and eventually the second Great Awakening in America broke out. And now that I look back on it, I understand why the Lord sent me that morning to the Wall Street area. And as I was there, I understood that I also had to go to Ground Zero. I hadn't been to Ground Zero because I hadn't had the opportunity prior to that period of time in my life to be in New York again. And so that day when I was in the Wall Street area, I just felt the sense that I had to find my way to Ground Zero. And I was, walking afoot. And I am the sort of person who kind of gets lost very easily. I don't have that internal GPS that most people seem to have. I'm the type of person who gets lost very easily. And as I was walking around Wall Street, and I had this sense of sadness before I went to try to find Ground Zero. The Lord had me standing at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge, and it was snowy. It was a very cold and cloudy, dark, gray day. And I was standing at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge, and I could see the bridge, stretching out into from Manhattan towards Brooklyn. And I stood there, I watched it, and I knew that when I had returned to the New York area, that I had a calling to be in Brooklyn. Whether literally or figuratively, I just had this sense that I had to be in Brooklyn. And I had never been in Brooklyn before. I had had the opportunity to live in Queens, in the Briarwood neighborhood of Queens, a long time ago. And I had been to Queens and Manhattan, and I'd commute between Manhattan and Queens. But I had never been to Brooklyn, which is kind of a strange thing for a person who has had the opportunity to live in New York. And when I was standing there that cold afternoon, I just felt like, like those little kids, those poor kids who are, on a winter morning, or they're looking at this window case and they see this nice little gift inside behind the glass, and they know that they can't access it because they can't afford, there's something blocking them, preventing them acquiring the gift. And that's how I saw myself when I was standing there, that I had to get to Brooklyn, and that the vision would be fulfilled in Brooklyn, but I was not being allowed to cross. Not because I didn't want to, but because man just didn't want me to cross. God wanted me to cross, I wanted to cross, but man didn't want to. The church didn't want me to cross. So I just stood there, and I just felt like, somebody who had been banned from entering a certain place. So that's when I decided to, walk out of there and go look for Ground Zero. And I remember that when I got to Ground Zero and I saw this humongous hole, I felt a fury inside of me. Not the fury of Al-Qaeda and Bin Laden, all these people, evil bastards, bringing down the buildings. That was not the rage I felt. The rage I felt was the rage of how in the world could New York have allowed this hole to remain like this for 4 years? I just felt a sense of outrage that America had kind of slept on the job, that it was supposed to have raised up these towers, and I would, if it had been my choice, I would have raised them exactly the same, and maybe 1 story taller, just to prove a point. But after 4 years, you still had this big hole, and I remember that the Lord had me looking at the names of all the people who had died, the big list of all the people that were being posted there. And I remember that the Lord made me write down some of the names, and I I felt in my spirit that some of the names had some connection, spiritually speaking, to the circumstances in my personal life. I remember writing them down, but I don't know exactly what I wrote down right now, and I'm not sure if I even have that piece of paper anymore. But it was a very sad, sad moment. And the reason why I'm saying all of this to you is that that Brooklyn represented something in the spirit realm, and I wasn't able to get across in 2005 into Brooklyn for some reason. And Brooklyn is the place where Lorenzo Charles was born. And Jim Valvano was born in Queens, and that's where I had the blessing of living for a short while during my time, my first stint in the New York area. And the thing, one of the things I want to mention to you about Jim Valvano is that in his autobiography, the title of his autobiography is Valvano, They Gave Me a Lifetime Contract and Then They Declared Me Dead. It's kind of an interesting name for an autobiography. And I think there's a prophetic significance to that. And I believe that the reason in the natural why that's the name that he chose for his autobiography is that he had some sort of conflict with the people at North Carolina State after they won the championship in '83, and I think they won another ACC championship in 1987 or something like that. So he was a successful coach. He continued being successful. He never won the championship again, the NCAA championship, because that was something that God opened up for him, a kairos door of opportunity, and he and NC State took that opportunity, and they were champions. And in fact, the next year they didn't even make it to the NCAA tournament. They only made it to the NIT tournament, which is kind of like the tournament for all the good quote unquote good teams that couldn't make it into the NCAA tournament, and they got eliminated in the first round. And I think that God allowed that to prove a point that championship in 1983 happened because of God. It was God and His presence with them during that tournament that propelled them to the championship. It was not them; it was God in them. But the thing is that Jim Valvano did recover from that unsuccessful second season after the championship, and he won a lot of games with NC State, but there were some issues, and you may want to read about them at Wikipedia or some other website. The thing is that because of these incidents and questions of impropriety, which ended up being cleared up, he was never guilty of anything, but one of the things that was held against him was that his students didn't produce academically the way they should. And the thing is that the relationship between Valvano and the university became very sour, and the university ended up dumping him. And I think that's why he called his autobiography, They Gave Me a Lifetime Contract and Then They Declared Me Dead. And I think that's a prophetic figure of what happened to the remnant. Because the remnant was manifested in this generation for a reason. It's not like God randomly said, okay, the remnant is going to have a special manifestation between 1998 and 2000 and whatever. That's not how God does things. God did it because the table was set down here for in some way, shape, or form that drew his attention, and he started creating and setting up the souls and the set of circumstances so that his coming could be made possible. So a lot of people were born into this generation, people who could have possibly been born years and years earlier. God delayed their birth and made them come into this generation because he was gathering a certain group of people for a special visitation. And the reason why he began to gather these souls at this point in time is because there had been people clamoring for him to come. God doesn't come if he's not invited. The Spirit and the bride have to, the church and the Spirit say, "Come, Lord Jesus." So there was this calling, the spiritual calling that was emanating from somewhere in America towards God, asking him to come for a long, long time. And then God said eventually, "Okay, you want me to come? I'm coming." And that's why he decided to come and try to knock on the door of this generation. And he got to the porch, he started knocking, but they left him out on the porch, and he had to walk away. And that's correlates with the name of the autobiography. They gave me a lifetime contract. In other words, they said to me, "We want you, and we want you forever with us." But then they declared me dead. In other words, they cut me off midway through. So it's like one way of visualizing it is, imagine that you are working at a certain company and you're kind of okay there. It's not the greatest job in the universe, but you're getting by, you're getting paid, and you're having this acceptable lifestyle. And then suddenly you find somebody at a supermarket or a mall or whatever, and this person comes to you and says to you, "Hey, I'm looking for a guy or a gal just like you with your qualifications. And how much are you making?" And you tell them, "I'm making X amount." "Okay, I offer you double that." "Oh, but are you offering me stability? Are you if you hire me, would you hire me for a long period of time?" Yes, we're going to hire you. You're going to be with us forever. You're going to die a company employee with us. But taking that job implies you moving to a faraway city. So you have to take all your stuff, sell your house or whatever possessions you might have, and move to a completely different place, thousands of miles away. So you see that this person genuinely wants you working for them at that company, and they offer you this beautiful contract, and they offer you stability that you'll be working with them forever. And then you make your commitment, you sell all your stuff, and you move to that new place. And a couple of months after you are in that new city, the people of that company tell you that your services are not required anymore, and you're made redundant, and you're left out in the cold. You bury you cut off all your roots to the other place, and this place is now cutting you off, so you're left in the middle of nowhere. And that's what happened to the remnant, and what happened to God. God was offered a lifetime contract, and then he showed up, and they declared him dead. In other words, they didn't want anything to do with him. And that's what the Valvano autobiography's title represents spiritually. So that everything is tied together here. And another thing about Jim Valvano that is worth mentioning is that there's this famous speech. I wasn't aware of it, as I've said a couple of times. The 90s were kind of a blur to me. Just like people say the 60s were a blur to me, but they say it because they were taking drugs or something. In my case, it had nothing to do with drugs or anything. It's kind of a long story, but I kind of missed a lot of things in the 1990s because I was distracted with other things. But from what I found out on the internet, it seems that Jim Valvano gave a very important speech, like a very historic speech on the very first ESPY Awards. Those are the awards that ESPN gives out to athletes, and that was the very first ceremony, first time that ceremony was being held, and they invited Jim Valvano, who was already dying of cancer, and he gave this powerful speech, and at the end of the speech, his last words were, "I thank you, and God bless you all." That the end of the speech, and I think a few weeks after that he passed away. And I think it's not a coincidence that he mentioned God at the very end of that speech, and that speech had such a powerful impact on the lives of so many people. And it all and there's a lot, and all of that has a lot to do with what happened in 1983. That's why God wanted to visit that tournament and to manifest himself through NC State. The lives of countless number of people were touched, and the quality and the depth of their lives was forever altered because of God's presence in that seemingly irrelevant basketball tournament. And the anointing that was left in those people's lives was so powerful that everybody who came in contact with them, with Lorenzo Charles and Jim Valvano, knew that they were dealing with somebody who was very special, because that person had been in the presence of God, even if they were not totally aware of it. So that goes to show why every interaction of human beings is an opportunity for a holy moment. And if you are attentive, if you're paying attention in the Spirit, you will know when you have to forge that holy moment and invite God to manifest himself in that moment, and in such a way that the lives of people will get impacted. Now, another thing that's interesting about Jim Valvano is that he was buried in Raleigh, North Carolina, of all places. And that's where Lorenzo Charles, unfortunately, died at the same age that Jim Valvano died, in Raleigh, North Carolina. And one thing that I'd like to mention is that Jim Valvano, I didn't know this, he started his coaching career in Baltimore. Isn't that interesting? God had an insignificant little soul in Baltimore, Maryland, in 1983, praying for him and his basketball team, and God made sure that he started his career, his coaching career, in that very same city, where that was 1968 when he coached in Baltimore. And 15 years later, there'd be a Christian in Baltimore praying for him and his team. I know that's not a coincidence. And interestingly enough, he began his coaching career coaching the Johns Hopkins University basketball team. And that has a lot of significance to me, because that little Christian who was praying for him in 1983 in Baltimore was praying a few blocks from Johns Hopkins University at that time. That's where I and my family were living. We were living within walking distance of Johns Hopkins University. And the other interesting thing is that I took my first math courses at Johns Hopkins. I took some courses there, and I earned some university credits. I ended up graduating somewhere else at another college, another university in Baltimore. But my first university credits, math credits, were I received them at Johns Hopkins University, and I believe that it was 1982 when I last attended Johns Hopkins, and the next year I was praying for a coach who had coached there 15 years earlier. So I know all of that is not a coincidence. So that's what we have to say about Jim Valvano. And now let's go to the next person. See, we've talked about Mr. Lorenzo Charles, and we've talked about Jim Valvano. Now we're going to talk about this person called Armen Gilliam. I was kind of surprised that to see on the news that there was another person who had passed away at an early age, and who was also a basketball player, and it happened to be this person called Armen Gilliam. He apparently, I do kind of remember him, not that vividly because I started getting disconnected from college sport, American college sport, around 1986, and then I entered the dark ages of the 1990s. Uh, but but I do kind of remember him mostly as a professional player, and from what I read, he apparently played for a while in Philadelphia. So when I thought of Philadelphia 76ers and Armen Gilliam, it kind of rang a bell. I mean, I could kind of visualize Gilliam as a 76er. And I think he might have played with Charles Barkley at Philadelphia. I'm not quite sure, but that's kind of where I recall him. But from what I have read, he was a major basketball star at the college level at UNLV. And the thing is that he passed away, I think it was in early July. Lorenzo Charles passed away at the end of June. I think it was June 29th or 27th. I'm not quite sure right now. And Armen Gilliam passed away in early July of this year. So they died almost within a week of each other. And surprise, surprise, he died. Armen Gilliam died at the age of 47. So I know that's not a coincidence. And Armen Gilliam was this picture of perfect health. They say that he when he would play against younger players, even in his late 40s, he would outrun many of his younger players. And I saw pictures of him, and he remained a very fit and healthy person. So you wouldn't think that he would be a candidate for an early death, but he ended up dying of a massive heart attack, and he died playing a pickup basketball game. So it's kind of ironic, and that's what people say about him, that at least he died playing, doing what he loved to do the most. And I know that is not a coincidence. And I was kind of saddened as well when I read about him, even though I was not too familiar with him, that it was kind of sad to me that he had passed away. And when I started looking for information about him, one of the things that drew my attention was the name Armen, which is not that common. And I found out that he initially was called his name would be spelled Armon, Armon, but apparently that led to him being called Armand or something like that. And the way people would pronounce his name kind of annoyed him, and he had to correct people all the time. So he later on, during his NBA career, he decided to legally change the spelling of his name from Armon, Armon, to Armen, Armen, and so that people would pronounce it correctly. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it the way he wanted it to be pronounced, but let's, for the sake of argument, call him Armen Gilliam. And since it's a kind of an unusual name, it was not easy to find its meaning, its exact meaning. But I found several. The Lord led me to several similar names. One is Arman. I'm just going to spell it here for you. Arman, which is similar to Armen, except for the A. So, and Arman is a Kazakh name from Kazakhstan that means dream, and it has a Persian origin. Isn't that interesting? His name, Arman, if that's the actual, if that's the root of the name, means dream. So when Armen Gilliam died, it's like the dream died, which correlates with everything we were saying before. And it's not like I am looking ahead to the other facts to make them match the previous facts. It's just how it's turning out. And there's also a name, Armen, that's spelled the same as as he ended up spelling it later in his life, Armen, which is a variation of Armenia. So it points to the nation of Armenia. And if you go to the website and you look up Armenia, you're going to find that we talked about Armenia extensively in the Sharks season postings. And those are the postings where we talk about the Lorenzini ampullae, the Lorenzini organ in sharks that made us think about Lorenzo a while back as we were posting some tweets on Twitter. So it's not a coincidence that there's a connection between all these people. And also, that's another interesting thing, is that there's another name that's very similar to his name, that's Armand, or Armando, Armand. And Armand means army man. And I think that has prophetic significance. Army man points to somebody who has come to fight a war. And the dream that was in my heart and mind ever since I was a young Christian was not a dream that I just hoped that would fall down from the sky and become true. I understood that that dream had to be fought for, that there was this army that was going to fight to make the dream come true, just like the Israelite army that came together in the time of Joshua to take the promised land. They had a dream, and they knew that there was a promised land that they had to take, but they understood that it was not going to be handed to them. They were going to have to coalesce as an army and work under the anointing and the guidance of God, the captain of hosts, in order to take that land. So I think that the fact that Armand, which is kind of a very similar name to Armen, that name means army man, is not a coincidence. And so the other thing that's interesting about Armen Gilliam is that he was born in Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. If I'm not mistaken, Jim Valvano, after coaching at Johns Hopkins, coached in Pennsylvania for a season. I can't remember. I think it was Bucknell University where he coached. Then he went to Iona in New York, and then he coached at NC State. So Pennsylvania, there's a connection with Pennsylvania in the middle of all of this. But what drew my attention the most is that, Bethel Park Bethel means house of God, and Bethel was the place where Jacob had the ladder vision, where he rested on his head on a stone, and then he saw a ladder that went all the way up to heaven, and angels descending and ascending on that ladder. So it talks about an angelic visitation, a flooding of the presence of God from the heavenly realm into the earthly realm, the flood that we've talked about in a previous video. So so it's not a coincidence that his name can be taken to mean a dream, and Jacob had a dream about the visitation of God at a place that he ended up calling Bethel, meaning house of God. This is where God is. So, because our dream, the dream that the remnant have had, is the dream of seeing the presence of God flooding the earth, so that the earth becomes the house of God, the Bethel Park, where God parks His presence and stays permanently. All of this is not a coincidence. And another interesting thing about Mr. Armen Gilliam is that he played in the 1986 USA basketball team. And before, I can't remember the exact year, but those of you who are old enough may recall that in the past, the national American basketball team could not have professional players. They all had to be college players. And that's why they always had, such a hard time winning in the Olympics against the Russians and all those people, because the Russians in those days were communists, so they really didn't have technically a professional league, but they were really professional because they were being paid to play by the government. So that kind of made it an unfair competition because the Russians could field a team of professionals that could pass up for amateur players, and the U.S. had to play with all these young kids from university. And in the 1986 USA basketball team, you had Armen Gilliam, and you had some other talented players. I think David Robinson was also on that team, and they surprised the world by winning the World Championship in 1986, and they defeated the favorites, and you know where they played that championship that they won, that nobody really expected them to win at that time. They played it in Madrid, and so they left Madrid with golden memories and as world champions. So it's like they went to Spain. So you see how Spain is related also in all of this, and they conquered Spain. They conquered the Spanish fly, and they defeated it, and they were able to leave Spain victors. And this is what this generation was unable to do. This generation was supposed to overcome Spain. In the negative sense of the word. Spain, in that negative context, represents the part of Japheth that betrays God and sides with Ham. That's what Spain represents in a negative context, as we share in the shark season postings by coincidence. And so that is another interesting fact about Armen Gilliam, that he was a world champion as a member of the USA national team while playing in Madrid. And another thing about him is that he began his professional NBA career with the Phoenix Suns. He was drafted by Phoenix into the NBA. He ended up playing for several teams. He was a very successful, very good player. He played for 13 years in the NBA. He was not your typical journeyman. I think he scored like 12,000 points and had like 6,000 rebounds, so he was a pretty good player. And but the fact that he played for the Phoenix Suns is kind of a prophetic figure of the remnant that rises from the ashes, that goes through fourth green death and fifth green hibernation, and rises from the ashes to conquer in God's sixth seal, vengeance. And so all of that is relevant. And one thing that draws my attention, I don't know exactly how this may be interpreted, but I share it with you, is that Armen Gilliam was part of the generation of players that put UNLV, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, on the basketball map, you could say. I think that when he was there, the UNLV team was, I think, the winningest, or one of the winningest teams in all of college basketball. And he was part of the UNLV team that won 38 games in a single season, and it's an NCAA record up until today. And why 38? It's the number of years that the Israelites were in the desert. So that would point to a remnant that was able to survive the 38 years. In other words, it was able to live past the 38 years because God decided that none of those people in that unfaithful generation would enter the promised land. So there was this 38-year period when God had them wandering in the desert until they were all dead. And the only people who survived that from that generation were Joshua and Caleb. So they overcame the 38 years of wandering that God cursed that generation with, and they were able to enter, not only to see, but enter the promised land. So I believe that's what the 38 consecutive victories represent. And UNLV, they play in the desert. I mean, when people think of UNLV, they always think of the team in the desert, in the Nevada desert. So he played for that desert team, and he overcame. That team was able to overcome or win 38 consecutive games in a single season. So all of that is prophetic. And also another thing that's worth mentioning as a side note, as a parenthesis, is the fact that the surname Gilliam arrived in England as a surname after the Norman conquest of 1066. The famous battle when the Normans conquered England and began a new era for the British Isles. And so it's kind of a French Norman type name that entered England because of the Norman conquest of the Battle of Hastings. So I'm sorry if I'm wrong with my history sometimes, but it was the famous battle, supposedly famous, which I should remember, the Battle, I think, of Hastings of 1066, when William conquered England and defeated Mr. Harold or somebody like that. I'm sorry, I'm not very good with Middle Age history. But the thing is that Gilliam came into England as a result of the Norman conquest, and is a variation of the name Guillaume. And Guillaume is the French version of the name William, and it's a combination of William is a combination. It comes from the Germanic name Wilhelm, and Will means will, like in English, and Helm means helmet. So it's Guillaume or William or Wilhelm is a combination of the words will and helmet, and I believe that has prophetic significance. And we'll talk about that in the next video, just to avoid making this one too long.